Hello and welcome to another live streamed edition of Adam's Music Box. Right and ready now. How's everyone doing? I think I'm going to do these Saturdays and Sundays, maybe more, maybe less. I don't yet know, but let me know whenever you're watching the replay of this what you think as we try to grow this channel here. So I've been thinking a lot about hip hop artists that sort of started within this really interesting world where commercial hip hop and underground hip hop kind of sort of had an interesting parallel relationship in the 90s. And this is because the genre was really breaking big. And so record labels were looking to sign anything that was hip hop. In the same way that after the Beatles, every record label wanted to sign artists who kind of sort of sounded or even looked like the Beatles. And what that meant is that a lot of underground acts with an underground mentality, with a conscious style of lyricism, were able to get record label back big records out in the 90s as hip hop artists. And there are a few of my favorites that I wanted to highlight because a lot of people out there might incorrectly think that these people were sort of one album wonders or two album wonders, where the reality was their relationship with the commercial mainstream might have been comparatively brief, but their artistry continued to excel, and they're all very much around today doing very interesting things. So the first of these great MCs I want to talk about is Kam, K-A-M, otherwise known as West Coast Kam, to differentiate him from Cameron from the East Coast. Now, Kam is one of the finest conscious rappers of all time. His lyrics are very biting. His flow is very magnetic. He's very, very clear about everything he's saying. He really goes for the jugular and has some really interesting messages conveyed in a very potent manner. And that's probably because he's a very intelligent man. He's just started, it's one of those days, folks. He's just started to do a lot of podcasts, both on some of his own YouTube channels, as well as doing material for this other channel. And I'll try to get you the name of it because he talks about music a lot on this channel. So just bear with me for a moment. You can turn on the elevator music as we go along, because what he has been doing is sort of reminiscing and answering questions about many of the great artists he worked with, because Ice Cube is a distant relative of his and they were very close friends. It was Kam who famously cut Ice Cube's Jerry curl and gave him his new look for the 90s. In the early 90s, he was the one who got Kam was the one who got Ice Cube very politically involved, very much into the Nation of Islam. Has a lot of interesting stories to tell, not only about him, but about people like Nate Dogg, Snoop Dogg, Tupac, DJ Pooh, all of the real titans of West Coast hip hop in the 90s. Kam has stories about. So the channel that he's doing a lot of this discussion on is called the Digital Soapbox Network. I'm going to put it in the comments section so you can take a look at that for your own selves. So he's doing a lot of these shows about all of the things that he's interested in, the socio-political topics that he raps about and that he's very passionate about, but he's also talking music a lot on this channel. And he's a really good storyteller, and he's known some of the best in the business, and he really approaches it from a very realistic manner. He doesn't sugarcoat the stories. He's not telling the Hollywood version of what happened, and I think that's really good as well. And then he's got his other new channel, which is sort of his own channel, and this is called the Campaign Trail. And I'm going to copy this URL down there too, if you'll bear with me for one moment. This one doesn't look like it's a custom URL, but I'm going to copy it down there anyway, because he's got a lot of good stories. If you're into West Coast hip hop, you're definitely going to want to follow both of those YouTube channels and hear his stories. But before you do, you should really listen to his two seminal albums from the 1990s. The first was from 1994, and this was a sort of Ice Cube co-production. Ice Cube appears on one of the songs, but other than that, it's all Kam rapping solo. And this is called Never Again. a really good album that for a long time was off of Spotify. Then it appeared to come back to Spotify, and now I think it's gone again. And I'm just going to check for you again because there have been some disputes with various record labels. You know how that kind of thing works. So yeah, Never Again is gone, but you can pick up a really cheap CD copy on Discogs. I highly recommend that you do. You can search the web for it elsewhere. You can find some of the music videos from that album and other things on YouTube and elsewhere, but definitely check it out. It was his debut album, and it is really really good. The top song from it in terms of a single was called Peace Treaty, and this was all about an event that was actually somewhat documented in the 2015 Straight Outta Compton film that detailed the rise and fall of NWA. And this was, of course, when in the wake of the LA riots of 1992, the Bloods and the Crips had a truce, called the Gang Truce, and Cam was someone who was instrumental in promoting that, as someone who was always really part of the scene. He was from Watts and never lost touch with his roots the way some have over time, and he did a song about that called Peace Treaty. And this was a single. There was a music video released for it, and it was off of this 1994 album, Never Again. In 1995, he came out with another album, which in terms of production is maybe even better, and in terms of the lyricism, just as good. And this one is, at least for the time being, on Spotify. It's called Made in America. You've even got Warren G doing some production on it, not of all of the songs, but a bit. And you can really feel that G-Funk. Wonderful production all around on all of the tracks, and a really, really strong album. Now, a lot of people think that after that album, Cam tended to fall away from the music world, but that's not true at all. What happened was his relationship with record labels became increasingly tense because he wanted to do his own thing. He wanted to get even more hard hitting, even more brutally honest with his lyricism. And so he went his own way. And there are some tracks from this sort of post 1995 era that are still on Spotify that you can listen to. There's a really good one that has magically reappeared on Spotify from 2014, and it's called Bubbling, and it features Nate Dogg. Wonderful hook from Nate Dogg there. And there's a lot of his other stuff that's starting to gradually reappear. There was a single he did from 2020, a diss on the YouTuber and commentator DJ Vlad. You can listen to Cam in his own words explain why they had beef. And a lot of good stuff, but a place where you can really find his stuff that is either too hot for Spotify or just hasn't really yet, anyway, got on that record label circuit is on his YouTube channel. And I'm going to put this one in the comments too. You'll give me a second. Because there's a lot of his sort of commentary, his social commentary, but there's also a lot of his music. And this is stuff that isn't on Spotify. A lot of it was never formally released on any CD. This is proper underground stuff. And there's some really, really good stuff. I'm just going to go through his channel now and go to some of his older uploads of some of his really underground stuff. And try to tell you what some of my favorites are, because you should really, really check that out. While I'm scrolling through that, DJ Pooh did an album from 1997, I believe, and Cam did 2 tracks on that. Both of them are very good. The album's called Bad News Travels Fast, and the Cam songs there are No Idea, featuring Charlie Wilson and Roger Troutman of Zapp, obviously. Wonderful stuff. And then there's Whoomp Whoomp, which is a diss on his old friend Ice Cube. I'm a huge Ice Cube fan, but you should listen to it. So one of his songs that's been on his YouTube channel since for 12 years anyway, it's Do You Know? And that's really all about the music industry. Similar subject matter is covered on one called Don't Think So. Can't Break Me is another one. And you just should go through his older YouTube uploads, because he's got a lot of his songs that are really, really good that have not yet, anyway, made it to the streaming services and that weren't really commercially available at the time. So check him out, West Coast Kam. Another rapper, pardon me, I hope that's not killing your ears in the microphone there. But another rapper who had a similar kind of trajectory where he was doing mainstream stuff in the mid 90s and then went pretty much fully independent. And this was Ras Kass. Now, he is one of my absolute favorites. He's known for being one of the top lyricists of all time. And he started out again, part of the mainstream. One of his early singles was actually a co-production, what was a production of Dr. Dre. And this was called Ghetto Fabulous from his second album, Rassassination. So he's Ras Kass, Rassassination. He had an album before that that I also think was pretty good called Soul on Ice. But some of his most interesting stuff has been the stuff that he's funded through social media, through crowdfunding, and through non-traditional means. And there was one that I was listening to just today, which I think production alone is so good. And this is from 2013, and it's called Barmageddon, Barmageddon. And I'm going to put the Spotify link to this in the chat so that you guys can check it out later. Definitely listen to this album, because while all of his albums have great lyricism, this one has super interesting production that I just cannot recommend highly enough. The songs, for instance, Come On, what a great song that is. So many others. There's really not a bad track on that album, so I would definitely advise you to check that out. Another album that he did even more comparatively recently, this is a 2017, I keep saying, want to say 2027 album, having a Joe Biden moment, folks, but this is called Intellectual Property, one of his absolutely hardest hitting albums lyrically. And Ras Kass is one of the finest lyrical conscious rappers of all time. There's no issue which he won't touch and which he won't go full bore on. And everything he does is so flowing and so poetic and really just so great that you should check out. After you've checked out Barmageddon, check out Intellectual Property. And he's released a lot of singles outside of albums as well, just in the last few years. So definitely check those out, because those are on Spotify. And you can find that link when you go to the Barmageddon that I've put down there. You'll definitely be able to find his other stuff. Another great one, Breakfast at Banksy's from 2015. It's a collaborative album with Semi Hendrix and Jack Splash. And there are lots of other great featured artists on there. Definitely check that out. You've got Corrupt, who does a track with him on there. He's really collaborated with all of the great West Coast artists, from Dr. Dre to Corrupt, Ice-T. So Ras Kass, an artist who, frankly, since falling away from the mainstream, he's actually become even more prolific, and I would say even stronger in terms of his musical talent. Another one that you should check out is Skee-Lo. He had what was really a big hit in the mid 1990s with I Wish. I'm sure you'll know it. I wish I was a little bit taller. I wish I was a bowler. But check out the full album of I Wish. He's dedicated himself to mostly spiritual music and conscious music since then, but the album I Wish itself has a lot of conscious material on it, a lot of great samples. The song Superman samples one of my favorite Isley Brothers songs, Between the Sheets. And so definitely check out Skee-Lo. Do not sleep on him. The same could be said, frankly, about K-Dee, who's a legend of West Coast hip hop, but who's someone who's kind of remembered for his 90s material. He's done some other great stuff since. As Gas or Cash was one of his seminal albums, but check out all of this stuff. There's a few of them on Spotify. Check that out for sure. Now, another that I want to talk about is Del the Funky Homo Sapien. Say that 3 times fast. Now, he was someone who broke really big in the early 90s as a West Coast rapper from Northern California, from Oakland. And his huge hit that was all over MTV Raps and everywhere else in the early 90s was Mr. Dorbalina. And you'll know that from a Monkees sample, because it's a sample from an an a cappella sort of experimental Monkeys tune from, I believe it was from the Head album, either Head or Headquarters, because those were two Monkeys albums. I don't remember which, but you can look that up yourself. But since then, he's gone on to some really interesting stuff, and some of it is on Spotify, some of it isn't. I'm just checking now. Um, the album Attractive Sin from 2012 is on Spotify. That's a great one. But a lot of the stuff you can find on Bandcamp, and he's selling it for really cheap. So you should really check that out as well. I'm just going to give you some of the names of some of my favorite stuff that you can look on his Bandcamp. 11th Hour. Definitely go to Bandcamp, and for a small nominal fee, you can pick that up. Wonderful, wonderful album. Then there's Funk Man. The Stimulus Package came out after the Great Recession. Definitely check that one out as well. It Ain't Illegal Yet. Pick Your Price is another one that he did that's only on Bandcamp, but I really, really recommend that. Back to Spotify, you've got Both Sides of the Brain. That was one that was sort of done in that interim period between his sort of commercial period and him going completely sort of self-owned, self-everything. And this one is from the year 2000. It still sounds futuristic when I say that. And this is an album called Both Sides of the Brain. So definitely check that out. And then finally, the rapper Paris. Now, Paris was a very militant conscious rapper who made the news in the early 90s for his song Bush Killer. And you can imagine what it's about. Gorilla Funk was another big one. And he was someone that was really, really pushing the conscious stuff early on. He broke away from the mainstream because the mainstream didn't really like him. But again, a legend of conscious hip hop. So just to recap, check out West Coast Kam, and I'll write these in the chat. West Coast Kam. Check out Paris. Check out Ras Kass. Check out Del, the Funky Homosapien. I'm going to have to spell check that one for you people. Homosapien. And maybe that's why I wasn't able to. So, and who else did I put on that list that we just went through? West Coast Kam, Paris, Ras Kass, Del the Funky Homosapien. Oh yeah, Skee-Lo and K-Dee. Okay, so those are my recommendations for really good hip hop artists that were part of the mainstream in the 90s, could have stayed part of the mainstream if the music industry had been a bit more open-minded, but they went on to do amazing and are still doing amazing things outside of the confines of the music industry. And I think that's a good thing, because these artists were sort of they couldn't be contained by the music industry because they had so much to say. And they're really my favorite hip-hop artists that were overground mainstream at one time and are now back to the underground roots in an age when you don't really need record labels. So long as you've got access to Bandcamp or your ability to get your stuff on YouTube, Spotify, all of that great stuff, then you don't really need a label anymore, because the physical media that was too expensive for a single artist or band to produce, that's really gone out the window, except if you're in selling specialty items like a special vinyl or an audiophile edition or something with artwork that's big or a poster. You really don't need the record labels for distribution anymore. And I think that's really helped a lot of underground artists, particularly a lot of hip hop artists whose message was sort of too hot for TV. So there you go on that. Some other stuff I wanted to get to as well. Wolfgang Van Halen has addressed David Lee Roth, who made a few months back some videos that were titled "This Fucking Kid," referring to Wolfie Van Halen. So the drama is never far from Van Halen. And so Wolf addressed this, and I wanted to sort of give you a summary of what Diamond Dave was saying about Wolfie. He was basically calling him a spoiled brat whose only fame was due to the fact that he's riding on his father's coattails. And this is something that Wolf has actually gone out of his way, frankly, not to do. His solo material, he plays all the instruments. The music is really nothing like Van Halen music. He's writing it all himself, not doing covers of Van Halen stuff. When he's out there on the road with the band that he's put together, he's only playing original material, and he's more or less turned down or poo-pooed the concept of organizing a Van Halen tribute concert. um, I don't think that's going to happen. The closest thing that we're going to get is what's already happening, and that's the Best of All Worlds tour that Sammy Hagar and Michael Anthony are out there doing. Be happy you have it. I've been watching the videos. They seem to get better every week. So he called him a spoiled brat, said that Wolfie was just riding on his father's coattails, and then he came up with some stories that really make Wolfie seem petty, and I have no way to know if they're true. I don't either. Wolfie says they're not, so that's the surprise out of the bag. But Dave was saying things like Wolfie kicked out the band's accountant from the gigs, was bitching that Dave wasn't paying enough attention to him. He just made him seem like a spoiled brat, which isn't the vibe I get from Wolfie at all. I love Wolfie, and I think that he's doing some really great things. And I really like the fact that he's blazing his own trail, doing his own thing, and not allowing the industry to tell him what to do, and not frankly allowing Van Halen fans to tell him what to do. Because remember, Eddie and Alex's father was a musician. He played what we would now call trad jazz. Imagine if there were familial or social pressures saying to Eddie and Alex, well, don't play that heavy rock music. You've got to play the kind of music your dad was playing. Well, we wouldn't have Van Halen. So if you weren't prepared to accept social pressures telling Eddie and Alex to play the music of their father, why should Wolfie be forced to play the music of his father? I think it's really good that he's blazing his own trail. Maybe he'll have a son of his own or a daughter of his own one day who will do the same. So Wolfie responded in the following way, and this is something from Blabbermouth. They're quoting him from a recent interview he did. And so the question was obviously, what's your reaction to what Dave said? And Wolfie's response is, he basically said a bunch of stuff that to him was true, I guess. It doesn't matter if it's not true, because the people that are going to listen to it will believe it and use it to hate me anyway. So you've just got to move forward. I think the big thing, one of the bigger things, is that my dad isn't around. So I think he, meaning Dave, just went for what's still there. And I think that there may well be some truth to that, because relations between Diamond Dave and Eddie were never consistently good. And at times they were, in fact, really bad. There's a funny interview that Eddie and Alex did from '96, shortly after Sammy Hagar left the band. And the joke was, I think it came from Alex, is that his name, David Lee Roth's name, got more expensive over the years. At first, he was just Dave Roth. Then he became David Roth. Then he became David Lee Roth. And then he became Diamond David Lee Roth. I just found that funny. If you're around in the '90s watching MTV, maybe you would find that funny too. And apparently, when they got back together with him, the reason was that they needed a singer, and they needed a singer with some credibility to make it a real Van Halen reunion. And so the choice, obviously, between Dave and Sammy. Alex apparently never forgave Sammy for the book he wrote in, I think it was just after 2004, which described, no, it was closer to 2007, but there were large sections on that 2004 reunion of the Van Hagar lineup, and he wasn't very complimentary about Eddie's state of mind at the time. He didn't say it with malice, I don't think, but Alex sort of took it that way. And from what Michael Anthony recently said, there is never going to be reconciliation between Alex and Sammy. But with Dave, they thought, well, we'll approach it from a business point of view, because where Sammy didn't really need the money because his business ventures were and are going so well, Dave probably could have used it. He wouldn't have said no, and he didn't say no. But it was apparently a business relationship. There wasn't much camaraderie between the three Van Halens and Dave. It was a professional relationship. So who knows who to believe on that? All I know is that I really love what Wolf is doing, because it isn't easy to have a famous parent. It's probably easier than having a parent who's a nobody, or who hates you, or who beats you, or who doesn't take good care of you. But having a famous parent who loved you is hard because the world knows it, and a lot of people are going to judge you through that prism. And some of it is inescapable. I would say that the reason I know what Mammoth WVH, Wolfgang's band, what I know about it because I'm a Van Halen fan. And his name is Van Halen. I do have to say, people that say, "Oh, you're using the name Van Halen, you're writing off his coattails," that is his name. It's not like he's calling himself Wolfgang Whitesnake, because obviously there was no one in Whitesnake called Mr. Whitesnake. There was David Coverdale. So if you called your band Wolfgang Whitesnake because you were David Coverdale's son, that would be one thing. Or if you were Richie Blackmore's son and you called yourself, I don't know, Richie D. Purple the Third. But his name is Wolf Van Halen. Van Halen was named for the name of the brothers. And ironically, since we were talking about Dave, it was Dave who, according to himself, so we don't know whether to believe it, it was him who convinced the brothers to change the name of the band from Mammoth to Van Halen. And now Wolfgang sort of, in his own way, changed it back for his stuff. But Van Halen was the better name. But anyway, why can't we be friends? Speaking of which, I have a standalone video that I've done on War. Definitely check that out. I'm a huge fan of War, one of the best fusion bands of the 70s, because they fused so many different things together, and they did it so very well. So I'm going to, if I can do two things at once, and there's no guarantee that I can. In fact, I probably can't. I'm going to put that in the chat of this live stream, so you can check that out, and definitely check out War, one of the best jazz, rock, Latin fusion bands that were uniquely West Coast in an age where there was still something of an East Coast dominance in terms of who the artists were that got signed, even though that changed in the 80s. In the record industry, the main offices were becoming more and more West Coast throughout the 70s. But check War out, a great West Coast fusion, very virtuosic, but totally accessible, vocal, so you can sing along with it. I've put the video to that in the chat. So anyway, that's a bit of a detour from our Van Halen drama, but definitely keep checking out the videos from Sammy and the guys on the road, because I honestly think that the band that he's put together get better and better every night. His voice is improving every night, because as he even said, his voice strengthens as the tour goes on. And that's definitely been the case since all of those people who take away their own enjoyment of the concert for our benefit to see it on YouTube, they have chronicled it, and it is getting better and better night after night. So the other thing I wanted to talk about on this stream is some problems with the audiophile industry. I love the audiophile industry. And it really makes you think, if the record labels weren't so lazy, and if they didn't treat their loyal customer base so badly, there wouldn't need to be audiophile labels. If they took the time and the effort to produce masterings, whether in the digital realm or in terms of record pressings, if they produce them with the kind of care that your analog productions and your MoFis and all of the rest of them do, you wouldn't need them. But because the record labels don't do that and never have, we do need them. And there have been several problems that have really kind of surfaced sort of post lockdown with the audiophile industry. And that's that they don't seem to be able to keep up with demand, which on the surface would be a good thing. But when the demand exceeds the supply, the solution is to create more supply. And a lot of these audiophile labels haven't been very good at doing that. We're seeing excessive delays on the releases of not only LPs, but of Super Audio CDs. And a Super Audio CD shouldn't be that hard to produce, but we're seeing delays. We're seeing things that have their release dates being set back. We're seeing things at some labels, particularly MoFi, on the coming soon category, and coming soon might be 3 years from now. Imagine if that was a pizza. You just wouldn't accept it. We all remember what happened to Domino's in the 90s. Or was it the 80s? all melds together. And there's been some news that MoFi is now trying to get their stuff out quicker. I know Chad Kassam, wonderful guy at Analog Productions, has said the same, but there still seems to be a drag on this. But there is an easy solution. Everyone listens to streaming, but most of the stuff that is on the streaming services is the stuff the record labels put out, not the audiophile versions per se. Even the high-res stuff on Tidal, it's the high-res stuff that the labels have put out, not the high-res stuff that an audiophile label has. And here's an elegant solution. The labels and the big record labels, your Universals, your Warners, and your Sonys, they need to approach the audiophile labels and do something that for once makes the customer happy. And they should say, look, we will happily license you to do your own masterings on vinyl and or SACD for X amount of time, because these licenses expire after a while, which is why, even though they might have the digital masters or the metal plating to repress records, these audiophile labels can't actually repress stuff after a certain time, because the license that they have acquired from the main record labels is only for X numbers of years, and in some cases it's even less than a year. So here's the compromise that I think would be a win-win for the customers, but it would certainly not be bad for the big labels or for the audiophile labels. Make a system that says, right, the audiophile labels have a license to produce this album on your LP, 45 RPM, let's say, and SACDC. SACDC. That's funny, because there is no ACDC SACD. Maybe there should be. But what they should do is do that and say, in return, you will have to give us your masters that you have created so we can put them up on the streaming platforms. And in return, we will say mastering by, let's say, Kevin Smith for acoustic sounds. And you can then put a link on your Tidal or whatever so they can go and buy the hard copy, which most audiophiles would do both. Most audiophiles would be happy to stream a Ryan K. Smith or a Chris Bellman or a Bernie Grundman mastering in their car or while they're walking, and still buy a hard copy of an SACD or especially an LP, because you can't really duplicate the analog sound digitally. They would do both. And so I think it would be an eloquent way to do it. Just to say it again for those out there who might be listening. When you license an album to be mastered by MoFi, Analog Production, Speaker's Corner, whatever, and if this is objectively, as it usually is, a superior mastering to the one that you at the label have put out, put a digital version of that on streaming. This would work specifically well with your titles and your co-buzzes, so that you could hear it in 2496 high resolution or even 24192. Credit the mastering engineer, credit the company he was hired by to do that mastering, and put a link in your titles and in your co-buzzes. And if Spotify ever gets something other than MP3 on your Spotify's too. And I think that would really make customers happy. For a while, Acoustic Sounds Analog Productions was actually selling their digital downloads in both FLAC and DSD of the stuff they produced, but someone who may or may not be a lawyer working for a record label made it so hard for them that they decided about 4 years ago or so to stop doing that. I wish that they could start doing it again, because these labels need to realize, unless channels like this become more popular, the new generation isn't going to give a damn about this stuff. They're not going to stream these legacy artists, and legacy is a polite way of saying old. They're not going to be buying this audiophile stuff. And because after about the 1990s, most popular music doesn't even really lend itself to audiophile masterings, there is not going to be an audiophile industry except to continually reissue this old legacy stuff. But when the audience dies off for that, maybe even that will go away. So, hey, big record labels, Shake hands with these boutique audiophile labels. Let them get their masterings on streaming. Make it financially worthwhile to them. Because in a few years, there won't be a music industry. It will be a tech industry, which it kind of already is. There'll be a tech industry that has a unit or maybe a subsidiary that markets music every now and then. But we're already seeing that because I do predict within 10 to 15 years, there will be no Universal Music, there will be no Warner Music, there will be no Sony Music, except as subsidiaries of companies that specialize in technology. So do the right thing now while you still have a chance. And on that ominous note, I'm going to say, check out the live chat that I believe will be preserved so you can see all of those great underground hip hop artists that I was talking about, and all of the rest. As always, to help this young channel grow, eat your vegetables. And once you've done that, call any vegetable because I am a Frank Zappa fan. And then like, subscribe, and share this channel. Share it to your friends and even share it to your enemies. If they don't like music and you want to annoy them, share it with them. But sharing is caring. Like, subscribe. We'll see you next time. Take care.